we walk into our work environments and life outside of work doesn't stop.
Oh,
Right. And
absolutely.
so then there's that work-life balance dynamic that just really increases stress. And when we don't address the stressors, we leave ourselves wide open for mental health challenges. And so that's what our educators, our teachers are faced with these days.
Hello, and welcome to today's podcast, where we will be debunking the myths surrounding mental well being in education. Today, with us, we are absolutely honored to have Dr. Jada Jackson Hill with us again. Hi.
Hello there. Hey, Jess. I'm so glad to be back.
I'm very glad to have you back. We did have you on a previous audio podcast,
Mhm.
but you are joining us here today on video.
And here we are. Here we are.
Yes. Before we begin, can you kind of remind our listeners and viewers now a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So, I am a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, and I just really love working with people. I have the pleasure of being the vice president of well-being at Listeners on Call. And one of the things I get to do is educate, talk about how we can embrace mental well-being. And it's not just about what happens in our mind psychologically, it's really a lifestyle and understanding how can we survive stress on a day-to-day basis. So that's really what I'm excited to talk about, especially surrounding educators.
So, with educators, kind of what is the current state of mental health in education? Are teachers struggling currently? What's the environment?
Mhm. Well, I have to say, very recently, I was dropped in the center of that environment because I got a chance to serve as a principal for a day. And
Oh.
it was very exciting, but I really got a chance to see very up close and personal what's going on and speaking to administrators and speaking directly to school counselors and teachers to see what's really going on. So I was able to pair like real life application to all of the research that's out there, and um, educators are struggling. And it's unfortunate simply because these are the people that we've entrusted with our children. They're the people we've entrusted with the legacy of our communities and our nation. And I think there should be just a little more attention
Mm.
focused in that area. And so some of the things that educators are struggling with based on research. Longer hours, lack of resources. One of the things many of the studies have said that teachers are spending a lot of their own money for resources inside and outside of the classroom just to make it work. And so um, they're losing little time because of lack of substitutes.
Mm.
That's another issue. Um, the co-worker interpersonal relationships have become a problem as well. And I can see that because that's what I work with every day with clients is those interpersonal relationships. And so when you're trying to do your job and then you have these other challenges, it can certainly impact mental well-being. And then there's just the compassion fatigue and the burnout,
Mm.
really having a heart to help their students, but not seeing the results of their efforts and their investment every single day. And so it really is impacting their mental well-being.
Oh yeah, and teacher content has crept into my algorithm a little bit on like YouTube and
Mhm,
Instagram, and I have a friend from college who's a
mhm,
teacher, so I see a lot of those things as current topics.
mhm,
Issues with administrators,
mhm.
interpersonal things, having to spend their own money,
Yep.
all those things. I definitely see teachers talking about that online even.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because when I visited the school not too long ago, I had to ask the question, right?
Oh yeah.
How are you doing emotionally and psychologically? And I kind of got this just kind of deer in headlights, response, and I know it's a challenge because remember, and just so you know this too, as I do, we walk into our work environments and life outside of work doesn't stop,
Oh,
right? And
absolutely.
so then there's that work life balance dynamic that um, just really increases stress. And when we don't address the stressors, we leave ourselves wide open for mental health challenges. And so that's what our educators, our teachers are faced with these days.
And when they have to kind of tackle those things, what are kind of the misconceptions regarding mental health that permeate the education field and kind of go against being able to address those things?
Absolutely. A lot of people believe that, first of all, there's just that stigma
Mm,
surrounding mental well being. So we have to get past that first. But then we have well, you can't have a dual diagnosis. You can't have two things happening at once. That's
mhm.
a misconception because you can have depression and you can have anxiety at the same time. You can fight an addiction and have depression and anxiety at the same time, right? And so these comorbidities come up, and all of a sudden you're in a space and you're like, I'm not sure what's going on here. How do I get out of this? And so that's important to note. Um, I think another thing is that many people feel that hormones do not impact mental well-being, and they do.
Oh yeah,
And that's
I would very much assume
you would
that.
say yes, absolutely. And so having a healthy balance of hormones, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but having a healthy chemical imbalance in the brain, all of these things are very important for us to have stable mental well-being. And to me, if we can manage the stressors before they become an issue, before they, just flare up, then of course we're one step ahead of the game.
So, for an employer to look at how they can kind of help with this issue, what does a workplace that's successful in kind of managing these factors or
Mhm.
improving their employees' happiness, what does that look like? What are they doing right?
Um, being able to talk about the issue, being able to provide that support, being able to listen and say, hey, you may have a stressor in this area or a stressor in that area, but ultimately it's about the culture. It's about what kind of culture are we providing for our staff to be able to thrive. And one of the things that I love promoting is that, healthy human connection is key. Being able to step into a space where you show empathy, you can listen and say, you know what, yeah, maybe that does need to change, or yeah, maybe we just need to have that conversation. I think it's very important. And so, workplace culture is certainly important, and those who take those steps get it right.
So, like having like the openness or the comfort to be able
Hmm.
to kind of talk about those things and
Hmm.
address those issues. Because
Hmm.
I'm like, I know when I've had issues in the past, um, maybe with a coworker or something, if you're just bottling it up and you're not dealing
Hmm.
with it and
Hmm.
it just kind of compounds
Hmm.
on
Well,
itself.
just what happens, right? It eventually has to come out, and usually that's not a pretty sight. And
No.
so, yeah, it's being very much in tune to the pulse of the culture and the environment, and how can we show up for those who really need it so they can do their jobs well.
So, employers that do put that effort in, that do foster that kind of environment and
Mhm.
take those steps
Mhm.
to create a culture that fosters happiness,
Mhm.
do they see the fruits of those efforts?
I believe that it's top down, and as that communication flows throughout the environment, you certainly are able to see that, hey, we're thriving a little better here in our environment. We're having more communication. We are reaching those areas of increase in productivity. So I do believe that when it starts from top down, you can't help but to see some form of
Like
progress.
when that precedent is set,
It's set.
then it kind of lays the groundwork.
And it's like with any environment. We're talking about educators in schools, but it's any corporation, it's any company, it's any discipline. And the reality is, any communication that starts from the top down has the potential to shift the culture. And I think that that's very important.
So, kind of pivoting a little bit to the personal level as opposed to kind of the employer level or
Hmm.
systemic level.
Hmm.
Um, I remember from our previous conversation on the audio podcast that you have a couple of tips and tricks up your sleeve for kind
Hmm.
of dealing with stressors or facing stressors. One of those I remember being your stop method. Can you kind of remind us what that all entails?
Absolutely, because I use it every day and I encourage my clients to use it. And the reason it to me is so very impactful is it gives us control over the external and the internal. And it's simple. It's stop. So the acronym, so S is for, okay, let's just stop for a moment, right? And it realize that this is a moment. T, take a breath. When we take in that deep breath, oxygen is released into the brain. Once oxygen is released into the brain, it signals to the rest of our body to relax. In other
Mm.
words, chill out. You've just been triggered, right? And fight or flight has kicked in, and you can go either way emotionally. But in the workplace, we have to be very strategic in how we handle situations. At home, you might fly off the handle, maybe fly off the handle. But at work, you don't have that option.
Yeah.
So take that deep breath and recognize that a breath is powerful. And then O is observe your options. What can I do right now? What is the least explosive path that I can take right now? What are my options as it relates to communication? Do I step away? Or do I acknowledge it right here in the moment? Is this an opportunity for growth, for me to set healthier boundaries? Is this an HR issue,
Mhm.
right? So it's just observing and saying, okay. And then the one that I like best is, am I overreacting? Because most of the time, whenever there's a potential for us to explode, we've been triggered in some way. And I tell my client, you're like, yes, absolutely. But I tell my clients all the time, before you react, just take a step back
Yeah.
and see if this is something, is the option that I need to look at myself in the mirror and I need to do some work. So that's the O. And then there's P, proceed with caution. You have to be strategic and make sure that whatever your plan is, that you proceed with a plan. And maybe it is, I'll deal with this later. Or maybe it's, you know what, I'm going to take a 5-minute break to collect myself. Or, this is a real HR issue and I'm going to set an appointment to talk to HR. Or maybe it's a manager issue or whatever it is. But STOP is a great way to maintain power over oneself.
And I know I'm in a coordinator position, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a lot of meetings with a lot of people, a lot of, watching people try to work together to get a
Mm-hmm.
certain goal established. And if I see things kind of going off the rails sometimes, I'll be like, okay, so how can I stop the bleeding?
Right, right, right.
And I'll do it
Mm-hmm.
a little bit even in a more external fashion too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And instead of, if I'm reacting to something a certain way, I will admit, since we talked last, I have used that method.
Awesome. See, my work is done.
But I will also kind of use it when I'm like observing a situation and be like,
Hmm.
well, how can I step in? How can I maybe make this
Yep.
not as tense
Hmm.
or,
Yeah.
or what have you?
Yeah. And the reality is, once you use it over and over and it becomes, normal practice, you would be amazed at how you go through the steps so quickly and the issue is resolved very quickly. And then you're on to the next fire, whatever that is, right? Because truth be told, the fires never stop.
True.
Yeah. And my clients who think that everything's going to be okay are the ones who find themselves in those chaotic moments most of the time because they think everything's going to stop. But one of the things I like to do with them is to say, hey, yeah, life is going to continue and there are going to be repetitive opportunities for you to use the stop method. So get ready for
Oh yeah.
it.
I am definitely I acknowledge
Hmm.
that life
Hmm.
just
It
happens
happens.
and just kind of gotta go through it the best you can. And
Absolutely.
having that kind of tool is pretty nice to have in the back pocket. Just kind of pull out.
And that's exactly what it is, a tool.
Yes. One thing I kind of wanted to talk about is we've talked about kind of the environment, the tools, but kind of what is really going on in the body, in the brain,
Hmm.
when we're facing these stressors, or what's making us unhappy or happy,
Hmm.
kind of what's happening in there.
Okay, so this is where I really love. I love educating and saying, hey, it's not just an emotion. It's not just a response. There's something going on up here in the brain. So I'm going to take you back, Jess, and we're going to talk a little bit um, about the chemicals in our brain and how our emotions react and respond. So everybody knows fight, flight, or freeze, right? So, what's happening in the brain in the amygdala, once the harm signal is sent,
Mhm.
norepinephrine is released into the adrenal glands. Once that happened, then we have cortisol and adrenaline that's released saying, hey, get ready, we're under attack. And remember, the attack is not always externally. That attack could be emotionally, it could be your supervisor said something, one of the kids did something, a coworker crossed a boundary, whatever it
You're
is.
remembering like a traumatic
Exactly.
event.
You're triggered, and something is saying to you, hey, you've experienced this before and it's not going to turn out well.
Ugh.
Right?
I was like,
Oh,
oh.
oh, I don't like that. So the reality is, we get to manage this. I say to my clients, hey, what needs to happen to get you back to baseline? What does that look like for you? And as we become aware of our triggers, and I have to say that word, and it's the triggers that's like right here in the center of my chest is where I feel that first prick or that first sting of, uh-oh, it could go down right now, right here. Something could happen right now. It's becoming very much aware of the process.
Yeah.
And our blood pressure rises, our heart begins to beat, we start to sweat, our hands become clammy. It's being aware of that, right? So when we engage in a healthy environment, when we engage in healthy conversation, when we're able to vent and talk about our emotion and what's going on with me right now, all of a sudden things start to shift. And that shift, um, I like to say DOSE, DOSE, use that acronym. And it's a perfect framework for understanding the chemicals and hormones that are released during certain encounters. So when I say certain encounters, I mean how we connect. It's that human connection, right? And so when we connect with people, dopamine is released, and we know dopamine is that kind of happy.
I'm a fan of
You
dopamine.
like dopamine, right, Jess? You look like, and yeah, I could see you being that. I could see it I could see it all over your face. So there's the dopamine, that's the happy chemical that's released, and then there's oxytocin. The oxytocin we all know as the cuddle
I
hormone,
was
or
about to say, isn't that the one you get when you get a hug?
yep, the love hormone. It stimulates trust and relate a strong relationship and bonding. It's the same hormone that's released during childbirth, and it's how we attach to our caretakers. So it's that bonding hormone. And then there's what I said, dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. So serotonin is the chemical where it gives us our confidence. It's that, hey, I feel good about myself. People who have low serotonin usually are depressed, and which is why we have SSRIs. That's another conversation,
Ah,
but that's serotonin. And then, of course, there's the good old endorphins. And so when we are working out, when we are engaging in high level activity, that hormone is released, and it limits pain. That's really what happens during that time. So the reason that's important is because you and I, just right now, we're engaging in the happy chemical of dopamine because we're connecting, we're having an honest conversation. We're talking about a really important issue, and we are connected in this moment. And we do it every single day. Now, just think, if we have a negative encounter with someone, what do you think happens?
those are all gonna
Well,
plummet.
exactly, right? And so it's just a very simple framework to remember what's happening when we connect.
So you covered stop again for us,
Hmm.
which helps in moments of stress when we're
Hmm.
facing those stressors.
Hmm.
But what would you kind of recommend for more times of reflection or self analysis? Like, how
Hmm.
should we look at previous stressors and adjust how we handle those situations in the future?
That's a good question, very good question. And for me, what comes up is self-regulation. Usually we have challenges because we haven't learned how to self regulate. We haven't learned how to address some of the issues that come before us. We just don't have the tools in place for it. One of the things I've championed for so many years, especially in elementary schools, is to teach emotional management, to teach kids how to self regulate through emotion and even through thought reformation, because it's so very important. And so, one of the things that I think is important is the talk method, because engaging in the opportunity to connect and to talk through situations and circumstances is just so um, stress relieving. And that's important. So, the T in our talk method is to trust your gut. I tell my clients again to, whatever emotion that comes up for you, believe it, honor it. So trust your instinct and trust your gut. The A is to accept the message that the emotion is saying to you, right?
Not just disregarding
Not
that.
just disregarding. So every emotion has its own messaging, right? If you're angry, usually that emotion is saying you didn't get what you want, or someone prevented you or stopped you from getting what you want, right? And so every emotion has a message. So listen to that message. And then the L is let someone else listen. Let a listener listen. I'm big on venting. I believe that if you just have the opportunity to talk to someone, you go, oh, okay, I feel better all of a sudden. And it's because, again, we got the boost in the chemicals and the hormones, and it's balanced us. But when you say it out loud, whatever it is the thing is, then it kind of disseminates and you're able to get back to business. And so it is very necessary to just let someone listen. And then to know your own emotional triggers. That's the K. Knowing your own emotional triggers. I talked about that a little bit, but it's just knowing what sets you off? What is that thing that's going to take you to an emotional place that you're unable to manage?
And I definitely believe in kind of like venting to other people. My friends can attest to this. We spend a lot of time venting to each other about
Mhm,
things.
mhm, mhm.
And I find that sometimes even just I'm not really looking for any kind of advice or
Yeah.
anything like
Yeah, you just
that.
need to vent. Yeah.
Yeah, I just need to kind of get it
Mhm,
out there. And sometimes just like explaining something to someone
mhm,
can help me kind of work through it a little
mhm,
better.
mhm.
Because instead of just kind of being in my own kind of thought pool swirling around in there, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
kind of organize my thoughts in a way that's required to explain something to someone.
Yep.
And I can process that a
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
better.
And that's really why I love working for Listeners on Call, because it really, what is important is, can we find a way to preempt the blow up or preempt the situation from elevating to um, a mood disorder or a personality disorder. As a therapist, that's what I do on a regular basis. But most of my clients, they don't necessarily need a therapist, they just need someone to talk to. And so just to have that opportunity to pick up and say, you know what, I just need to vent today, or I just need to get this off of my chest, and I don't want to go home with all of this heaviness. I'm going to take a moment, from the office to home to have a conversation. And it's so cathartic, so therapeutic to be able to just talk. And again, that's why I love what I do.
So, with you saying you have the opportunity to do that through Listeners on Call, let's talk a little bit about that. So, can you tell me a little bit more about the service, Listeners on Call?
Absolutely. So, one of my favorite things is that we pair the member with a professional listener. And when that happens, it takes place through the shared human experience. And so, that shared human experience might be, we come together around divorce because divorce has been an issue, or maybe it's parenting or being a single parent, a single mom.
Mm,
Maybe it's, I just got a new job and I'm not sure what to do, or I'm having financial issues right
mm.
now. I'm a caretaker, and I need someone who understands caretaking. So we have a diverse group of professional listeners who can show up and say, hey, I can listen to you empathetically. I understand where you've been. I've been there too. And let's just have a conversation about this. And of course, I have my favorite listener that I can call and say, okay, we need to chat today. Or my favorite thing to do is vent, to be honest. And I'm a therapist, and I believe that it's important to have an outlet.
Yeah, my boyfriend knows how much I like to have an outlet. The poor guy.
Yep.
Maybe I need to give Listeners on Call a call. Give
Yes,
him a
yes.
break.
Give them a break. Give them a break. And that's another thing that I say. If our spouses, our partners, people who are closest to us hear everything. And sometimes if you're in a relationship and you're talking about your spouse, and you get back together and you're like, yeah, everything is fine now. Remember, the people in your family and your friends, they don't have that transition, they don't transition that quickly. So if you just want, someone to talk to, and, pick up the phone, call a professional listener and say, hey, you know what? I'm really mad at my husband right now, and I just I need to vent. So yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you can't vent to your spouse about your spouse,
Yeah, you probably shouldn't do that
and you
unless
don't
you're
want
going to
to.
have a healthy conversation about it.
Well, yeah, if you're trying to
And
address
it's
something, sure.
but the venting part never
Yeah.
really goes well.
Well, I am so happy that we had you with us again today, Dr. Data. It was a pleasure, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Just thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here.